Welcome to the SGPN Fantasy Football Podcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, presented to you by Shady Rays. Go to shadyrays.com and use promo code SGPN for 50% off 2+ pairs of polarized sunglasses. We're also brought to you by the Golf Gambling Podcast Tailor-Made Stealth 2 Drive Giveaway. Head over to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/driver to enter today for the big drawing on April 8th. We're also brought to you by Baseball Money is Fake, our fantasy baseball podcast. Join Blake and Ryan 3 times a week. Get all the player breakdowns and statistical data you need to dominate. Dominated that word. All right.
Dominated it.
Like, subscribe, please. It helps support the show, and it's free. Drop your fantasy football questions. Let us know where we make our mistakes. And, let's get into Darnell, Washington. We're doing our player profiles. We've got about 35 of these done, 36 maybe. And we'll do a few more before the draft. But if you have a player you'd like to have us break down, drop it in the chat. And Darnell Washington. So he's 6'7", 270 pounds. I was telling Brad before the show, I really like some of these weights I'm really frustrated with. I feel like the college football could have done us a nice job and just gave us, like, this was what they played at last year. Because everybody is trying to pass the test, but they're also trying to trick the test. You know, Bryce Young goes and weighs 204 pounds when nobody believes that at all. And not only do they don't believe it, they think he's more like 185, 190. PFF was talking about how, hey, a gallon of water weighs 7 pounds. How many gallons of water did Bryce Young drink before he hit the scale? Then you have Darnell Washington that, played at 285, 290 in college, and he comes in at 270. And so it's just really hard to believe some of these things. Plus you have guys that, apparently shrunk and they were 6 foot in college and they're showing up at 5'9", 5'10" when they get their measurements. So it's hard to believe some of those things, but I will say this. He's a big dude, 6'7", 270 pounds with a huge wingspan. This allows him to be a very dominant blocker. He's like an extra lineman out there. It also gives him a big catch radius. And Brad's going to get into his player comp, give you some pros, give you some cons, and tell you a little bit more about Darnell Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dave kind of got to the first pro right off the bat. This dude is a physical specimen from a size perspective on the football field. Is 6'7", 270. He is likely going to be the tallest person on the field at any given time, right? Moving on to that, a tight end of that size, you're looking for blocking ability. And really, I put a pro for one and a con for another, but it's really because he's better at one than he is another. But he is a top 6 rated PFF blocker in both pass blocking and run blocking. So the guy can do it all. He is a significantly better pass blocker, in my opinion, than he is a run blocker. So that's just a little bit of insight on what I see. The last thing is he really is the most productive at taking those seam routes because of what we talked about earlier. The guy can give a little bit of a pass block and then set out and go up the seam. He's the tallest guy down the field after the play's already started, and he can just go up and get the ball. And that's what you see the majority of big plays coming from Darnell Washington being, or those seam routes in the middle of the field where he's 15, 20 yards down the field and able to catch that. Now, the issue with that is he's going to have to go to an offense that kind of schemes that for him, right? That it's not going to be something that he's not going to be this big elite tight end producer for your team, but he is, I believe, a tight end that can be on the field on day one because of his blocking ability, which initially for a tight end, to me, is vitally important because it means he's going to have opportunity in the passing game as well. Now, let's move on to the cons. The cons are clearly his production, right? If you look, he's got under 1,000 yards combined through his 3 seasons. While that's not an abnormal thing from a tight end perspective in college, because it's very wishy-washy on what kind of translates and what doesn't, it is still not great to see, right? Up until this season, he was sub 200 yards with only 17 catches. And then he bested that in totality, right? With 28 catches this year, 454 yards and a couple touchdowns, all career best this year, playing really second fiddle to Brock Bowers, who's clearly the top tight end in next year's draft. The second con I've got is, and I mentioned it a little earlier, is the run blocking. This is not because he's not good at run blocking. It's because he's not as good at blocking for the run as he is in pass blocking. So I think given that, you're going to figure out ways to get him in on passing downs more than you are to try to use him as a run blocker. Because while he's good at a PFF rating in that regards, if you watch, he doesn't have great technique. And it's not as good on film as what the PFF grade says to me. And then the last con are those route limitations. So I talked about the probing, the seams. He doesn't have like this big expounding route tree that you can use him in all these different areas and all these different concepts. He played like 70% of his plays in line, not outside, right? So it's more that traditional type of tight end usage than what you're seeing more of these athletic tight ends coming out in. But look, Darnell Washington, from an athletic perspective, had like a 93rd, was it 93rd percentile? Let me look. A 96th percentile weight adjusted speed score because the dude's huge and ran a 4.64 40. Right. So he's got some athleticism, but he doesn't, because he's so tall, you don't typically see like these great route runners that are that big. Right. That is a very unique type of situation, a unicorn type of thing. And I don't think Darnell Washington is a unicorn in that regard. So my player comp, it's hard because there's not very many of these gigantic tight ends. Right. And we've talked about, types and player types that teams have. And if you just go look at the roster for the Indianapolis Colts, all of their tight ends, that's Darnell Washington. Right. So I'm gonna pick one and say Jelani Woods, right? One of the big, tall, seam stretching type tight ends that you just throw the ball up and let him use his enormous wingspan and go up and get it. You can use him in the red zone. I do think he has some touchdown upside if he goes to a team that is willing to just kind of toss it up to him in certain situations. So Jelani Woods is my player comp. And I think from a production perspective, that is pretty much on par also. I don't think this guy's going to be a top 5, top 10 tight end or anything like that from a dynasty perspective, but he is a guy that has some benefits to an NFL team to be able to utilize.
Yeah, and I think the pass blocking is a pro, but for fantasy purposes can be a con. And so I know that you have to factor in the fact that Brock Bowers was out there, and there's no way you're going to have Bowers staying in line to block and letting Darnell Washington go out. He did get a lot more action last year. He played in the slot only 64 and 53 times the year before. This year, 114 snaps out of the slot. So you did see an increase in targets. He had 27 targets the 2 years prior.
Yep.
He had 43 targets this year. So the production score is super low. But the efficiency was really good. And so he had he, like you said, tied for it was 11th for inline snaps from the tight end position. He essentially was, an inline blocker, extra lineman for most of the time. But as far as the deep catches, tied for 16th at the position, deep yards, tied for 32nd at the position, and average depth of target, 24th at the position.
Yeah, his yards per catch are massive, right? You see 2020, 23 yards per catch, and then 16 this year. So,
and you're only catching the ball 10 times. It's a little easier to do that, but yes.
right,
yes,
right.
that is.
Yeah.
And, with Washington, you saw it at the combine. He doesn't have bad hands, as far as, making that one-handed grab. But the issue with him really is he's a little labored in and out of breaks, and you don't have that lateral quickness that you'd like to see. And what you see when you have a Travis Kelce, a George Kittle, or Darren Waller, or Evan Ingram, some of these more athletic tight ends, he is not going to be that guy. Yes, he is a house to bring down once he gets the ball in his hands, but NFL players they'll find a way to bring him down. But as far as creating separation and doing those kind of things, that's just not in his game. The seam routes, like Brad said, where he's getting those seam routes, or he's getting targeted in the red zone, where you're not seeing a whole lot of yards after catch with him. He's really doing the seam routes, or he's blocking.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the 15 to 20 yard, like if you just got in the red zone, that's where I want to see him utilized, because I think that is the money spot for him to be able to produce for your fantasy team at that perspective. Is if you're sitting at the 20-yard line and it's first down and you want to take a shot, like this is the guy to take that shot to.
Yeah, and again, from a fantasy perspective, we just don't see him as, one of the more athletic, receiving type of tight ends. And the PFF and Player Profiler agree. Player Profile's comp is CJ Uzama, and the PFF comp is Mercedes Lewis. So we do want to check in with Underdog Fantasy real quick. Remember, please like, subscribe, comment, drop any fantasy football questions. Let us know what you thought about the show. Brad, what an Underdog got going on?
Yeah, hey, look, Underdog's a great place for you to get down with all of your fantasy and player props all year long. They have your favorite NBA, NHL, and even Major League Baseball daily games. And guess what? They have even started doing their best ball drafts for the 2023 NFL season. So head over to UnderdogFantasy.com and use our promo code SGPN for 100% deposit bonus of up to $100. Again, that's UnderdogFantasy.com, promo code SGPN.
As always, good luck this season.
Cheers.